In history and material culture. It's going to be a great topic tonight. So let me do a little introduction for is it Dr. Clough, okay? Or as we do in South Georgia, can I just call you Wayne? Is it, okay. Wayne was born in the rural town of Douglas, Georgia, seat of Coffee County. It says I can say the year, so I'm going to say it, in 1941. His family has deep roots in South Georgia, having lived there for 5 generations. Growing up, he developed a love for nature and reading and learning to build things. He attended Georgia Tech, wait for it, earning 2 degrees in civil engineering and then a PhD in civil engineering at the University of California, Berkeley. He served in the faculties of Stanford University, Duke University, Virginia Tech, and University of Washington, and became the first alumnus to serve as president of Georgia Tech in 1994. Upon retirement from Georgia Tech in 2008, he served as secretary of the Smithsonian Institution until 2014. During his career, he was elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 1990, and in 2010, he was elected to the National Academy of Arts and Sciences. He received honorary doctorates, this was impressive, honorary doctorates from 12 universities. Clough was recently named the 2019 Conservationist of the Year by the Satilla River Keepers. And today he's part-time faculty member at Georgia Tech, focusing on climate change and supporting financially disadvantaged students and on the topic of writing. In his latest book, which of course we have for sale on the back, and some of you already have in your hands, Things New and Strange, A Southerner's Journey Through the Smithsonian Collection, he examines how his home of South Georgia became what it is today, showing when the surface is scratched, what might seem immutable actually hides a history of change. The book uses the vast Smithsonian collections to reveal how unforeseen consequences of even seemingly small events can change a place forever, which we certainly know a lot about in Thomasville. And so without further ado, and by the way, during the evening, if you'd like to step up and grab an appetizer or something to snack on, please do that. And without further ado, we'll have Dr. Clough.
Well, that's to remind me to be here, and so it worked. Let's see if I can get that. I don't know if I can get that off of there or not. The thing doesn't want to go away, does it?
If you click on it, this red X should appear.
It's not showing up on my screen.
Oh.
Oh, wait, I see it. Go away. No, it went away out here.
There you go.
Well, we're all here. So thank you all for being here. This is a project that I worked on for 6 years. And when I was a younger person and spent time at Stanford and had a great career there. I lived in California, loved the outdoors, going to the Sierras, seeing the great mountains, the glacier valleys, skiing, Yosemite, the coast, beautiful there. And I sort of forgot about Georgia. I forgot about where I grew up. I kind of lost the accent a little bit because people thought I was a hick. And I had to do that, and that was where I was at that stage of my life. As time went on, my mom and dad, after they retired, they moved back to Douglas, and I would come down here. You know, I would land in Jacksonville, and I'd have to drive from Jacksonville to Douglas. I made one stop outside of Jacksonville, a little town called Hilliard, which that's the thing that one of my great-great-grandfathers. And there's a guy who sold bowl of peanuts there. And so I got the biggest bag of bowl of peanuts. By the time I got to Douglas, I'd eaten all of them. But driving down the highways and looking at the territory, looking at the ground, looking at the trees, made me realize how beautiful South Georgia really was, and that I'd forgotten about it. So as I was secretary of the Smithsonian, I thought about writing something about growing up here, and I realized that Janice Ray and others have written books far beyond what I could write, and I'm not a professional writer. But I thought I might be able to do something by virtue of being at the Smithsonian. I was the first Southerner to be a secretary of the Smithsonian, the 12th person to be a secretary. And I knew one thing, the Smithsonian had amazing collections, 155 million things in the collection. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I could find a few things about South Georgia, Douglas, and I thought that would do it. And it turned out that was a fool's errand because, in fact, there were many things that I found that surprised me. So I would go into into one of the collections, and they millions, got collections of every possible thing. 66,000 bumblebees. It just goes on and on. And so, well, go in, and I would talk to the curator who knew all about it, and I'd say, he says, what do you want? I said, I want something about South Georgia. He says, what is South Georgia? This is the way I define South Georgia here. And basically it has to do with the fault line. The reason for that is that this book deals with natural history as well as human history. And certainly for gnats, Georgia, yes, Smithsonian has a gnat collection. And yellow jackets and snakes, if you will, they don't know anything about Coffee County or any of these boundaries. They just simply know they're in the coastal plain, and that's why they're there, because they can live there and they're acclimated to it. So the fault line is basically the definition, and the coast and so forth over here, and there's 4 fault line cities that you see here. It's really a fault zone, you know, it's about 20 miles wide. So that's the definition of where I look for things, that I can tell a curator, this, see if you got anything in this area. Then the next thing was that it had to have something to do with my family, because I wanted us to be in the story. And as I mentioned, and you'll see if my first relative came down to South Georgia in 1837. I didn't know that when I started the book. But my mother and father had made a life of a small business, ice and coal business in Douglas, Georgia, next to the railroad tracks. But it was near the school. I could go by that plant every day when I went to school and stop off and get a shake ice treat and see them. They both worked there and left me alone as a latchkey kid. But growing up in that small town was a great thing for me, because I love to be outdoors. I love to not have any shoes on, just outdoors all the time. And I learned a lot about nature. I learned to respect nature. I learned when to run away from snakes and all that stuff. And it's a big, it's just a great small town. It's about 5,000 people at that time. Not too much larger today, but that's from the centennial, the celebration of Coffee County. That's the kind of thing you saw. That's what the thing that brought everybody together, other than the tobacco sales at the tobacco plant. And big town together. And what you see when you look at this crowd and you start looking at it in detail, you see everybody's there. African Americans, whites, everybody. This is a communal celebration in a community that was segregated. Everything else was segregated, but not parades. Parades, everybody went to. But it's a typical small town upbringing. I had great parents because they had a lot of money, but they were great. Now the other thing to get in the book is it has to come from the Smithsonian collection. So somewhere in there, I have to find something in the collections that relates to either my family, which is a small segment of it, and certainly with South Georgia. Now, I mentioned the Smithsonian has huge collections, 155 million roughly objects, works of art, and specimens, mostly specimens, 147 million specimens. Birds, for example, 660,000 birds in the Smithsonian collection. So could I find a bird or two from South Georgia? And then that's Roxy Labor, who worked actually for free at the Smithsonian for many years. But the director of the bird collection, the ornithological collection at the Smithsonian, is a good friend of mine, Dr. Carla Dove. Carla's a terrific. Over here, I'm a geological engineer by training, and the mineral and gem collection and the jewels. I mean, just fabulous. It's amazing to see those things. 600,000 or so of those things. And everything big, everything amazing. Some of them are national collections, like the meteorite collection is mandated by Congress. The Smithsonian has to keep that up to date. 55,000 meteorites. So would there be a meteorite in there from South Georgia? That was the question. So those are the 3 parameters that we got to work with. So I started talking with curators. I got to know them very well. And Rusty Russell was the director of botany. 1.2 million specimens was the technical collection. Most of them in little cardboard plates covered up with cellophane so they don't get damaged. 200,000 of them identified an actual species. They're called type specimens. Well, he knew I loved the lonely pine and the lonely sun story, because I grew up with lonely pine. And he called me up and said, Dr. Clough, I got something for you. Come on over. First thing he showed me was some rabbit tobacco. From South Georgia. He knew the Latin name, I don't know. But he showed me this specimen. And he said, take a look at that. And as you look at that, you know, it makes an impression on you. This is a longleaf pine specimen, but whoever did that had a sense of aesthetics. I mean, it's arranged in a beautiful way. He doesn't have a big old pine cone there, he has a little baby cone. And he said, well, read the placket. So here, if you read this placket, Pinus polynthus, collected in Douglas, Georgia, 1903. And by Roland Harper. I said, okay, so here's the way this works. One question leads to another. So who's Roland Harper? That's Roland Harper. I had to go figure out who Roland Harper was. Roland Harper was a very interesting guy. He was in Douglas, Georgia, working on his PhD for Columbia University and fell in love with Southeast Georgia. He goes on to become the most renowned botanist in his era to work in Southeast Georgia. Now, Roland Harper's also one weird guy. And it turns out. Now, how many of you know obsessive compulsion? They're all odd, right? He was odd. He didn't get married till he was 67, but he was happy after that. 67. So what happens with this story is, it's not the object so much as it is the person who's involved with it. Why? He loved the Smithsonian, he sent his specimen to the Smithsonian. So it also was important to me, again, because the lovely pine, my relatives timbered them, and almost timbered them right out of existence. Only a few stands still exist. Our paleontology group, I called them up, I'd been on some field trips with them, and I said, any chance anything from your collections from Douglas, Georgia? Now, remember in the botany collection, I got one specimen out of 1.2 million. Now, they have 7 million specimens. But Georgia's not in the hotbed area of paleontology because we're here in the coastal plain. Our old rock is covered up by sediment. If you're out in Wyoming, you can drive by a bank and see a dinosaur bone because the rocks that are old are on the surface. So I wasn't too hopeful about this, but they said, we got something for you. We're going to show it to you. Go through Dinosaur Hall first and look at the Megalitherium, which I didn't know anything about what that was. Turned up there at John Brown's. And so they showed me this bone, and they said, if you look at it, and it's inscribed on the bone, it said it was collected at Skidaway Island in 1822, before the Smithsonian existed. Smithsonian created in 1846. So that was it. And so I said, what is this creature doing in Dinosaur Hall? Because it's not a reptile. It's a mammal. It's a sloth. So, see, question, right? All right, so I go back into the garden, how this is Kirk Johnson, the director of the museum. He's explaining how this animal worked. Got huge, but it was a vegetarian. And pulled trees down so it could eat them. Giant ground sloth, that's amazing. So what's the next question? How old is it? 13,000 years old. Next question, where'd it go? Why is it not still here? After all, some of you, like I have been, go to Africa to see rhinoceroses. They're unusual creatures. Africa still has their animals. Why don't we? This animal is a South Georgia boy. He came up from South America when the land bridge was. So that's the story that we'll get to in a minute. All right. As I got into this, I figured I can't just keep going to collections. I got to go down to South Georgia, and I went down to South Georgia many a time to see places where things come from. Literally to go to those places to see them. And that got me into eastern indigo snakes, one of the most beautiful snakes in the world. The biggest native snake in America. It eats rattlesnakes. It's non-poisonous. But it's endangered because its habitat, the longleaf pine, is gone. And people have been killing them because of their beautiful skin. So it's an endangered species. That one turned out to be on my grandfather's old farm. Another story, but you have to buy the book to get that. I don't get any money, it all goes to the Smithsonian. My friend Frankie Snow grew up 3 doors from me. He never left Douglas. He taught at South Georgia College. He's a botanist, a beautifully trained botanist. He got into archaeology. He got really interested in pottery, Native American pottery. And he came up with an identification of the way they make this pottery using paddles. Swift Creek pottery. Swift Creek pottery was named by the Smithsonian. I forgot to tell you that. And so the Smithsonian has examples of it, but not as good as Frankie got. And I should say, this snake turns out also to be Smithsonian, a different story. Anyway, this Swift Creek pottery is a woodland, it's an old pottery. It came before the people that built the mountain. This is much older than that. But these people were master potters at that time. And Frankie has identified this and able to show how all of these patterns have to do with their religion and the way they think. It's a pretty amazing thing. Pitts, one of my favorite small towns. You can go 60 miles an hour in Pitts. There's no traffic light. You don't have to slow down. There's hardly anything left in Pitts. But in 1921, in April, a meteorite flew right over Pitts and landed just at the northern city limits of that town. And I had to go see it because the Smithsonian has that meteorite. It's a famous meteorite. It's a heavy, famous meteorite, beautiful meteorite. And I got to interview the last man who saw it. And when I interviewed him, he was 102 years old, Osco Bennett. And when I started talking to Osco in his retirement home, fortunately his son-in-law was there. And Osco wanted to tell me about all 102 years. Fortunately, his son-in-law said, Dad, he's just here to talk about that meteorite. Yeah, it also took me to the LeConte Woodmanston Plantation, which I've never been to on the coast. It's a rice plantation, but it's away from the salt water. It's unusual, named after a family called LeConte. How did I get into the LeConte business? Through birds. I'm looking at the bird collection, and they said, we got some things from birds from South Georgia, and I kept seeing the LeConte name. I said, who are the LeContes? Turns out I should have known. I went to Berkeley, and I studied in LeConte Hall. I parked on LeConte Avenue. Two South Georgia boys in 1870 after the Civil War had no place to go but a little town called Berkeley. One became president, one became the most famous scientist in California. So there's a connection with everything. Everything's connected. And lastly, this oak tree. Now I know you've got a big oak tree, so I'm not insulting you. This is the sentinel. This is the grand champion, live oak. And it's right outside of Waycross. And when I got out there because of an accident, I was at a cemetery looking for my relatives. Somebody told me to come see this tree. So that's me standing there. And it turned out my great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfather one time had a store under the shade of this tree.
Wow.
And I never heard that story. So coming back involved getting out into South Georgia and seeing things again. Now, how do we get back to the story of the disappearance of the Megalitherium, or the Eurythmium? After I've done this enough, I've got all these data points. I started to say this collection relates to this collection. They're not just individuals anymore, they're connected. And I started to think about how one collection might interact with another. So I was starting into the Native American collections, and they were explaining to me how the collection vary by age. They didn't know about that until about 20 years ago. And they said these big points that we found, some in Georgia, were 13,000 years old. That's 13,000 years old? 13,000 years old. So what these points represent, these are Clovis points that were first discovered in Clovis, New Mexico, in the inside of a mastodon. And it proved that Native Americans were killing big animals using points. But nobody knew they were killing them in Georgia. It was Clovis, New Mexico. So these reports were found a long time ago by a man who worked on railroads. So they're in the Smithsonian thing. So the connection between these two is this guy got killed by humans who arrived in Georgia 13,000 years ago using big points. You've seen projectile point collections, and usually they don't jump up. We usually think that these little guys, well, once they got done with all the big guys, the points started getting smaller. And finally, when all the big animals were gone, they used points that big with arrows. That's how it changed. Now, this animal didn't exist by itself. there were a whole host of what are called megafauna that existed in Georgia and all over our country. They're all gone. They were all killed. Humans can do major things over given enough time. This biggest guy of all is the Columbian mammoth. The guy next to him is that ground sloth. The Columbian mammoth was the biggest elephant to ever exist in America. And the first head of a Columbian mammoth was found when they dug a canal from Brunswick to Darien in 1836. That's not in the Smithsonian. That's when they found it. They existed right here in Georgia. Always. Horses existed here. Lions, camels, believe that? Short-faced bears, bigger than grizzly bears and faster. These animals all went extinct at the same time. So the story is, it's about conservation. If you're not careful, over time, you'll run out of something that you thought you would see forever. So it changed the world. So I call this, what gradually evolved in the book was many, many stories, but there was a theme. Collisions. Humans and animals have never seen humans before collide. Animals loop. Other collisions. The Native Americans who lived here made that beautiful pottery were conquered by people from the West who had developed cultivated agriculture, and they're the ones that built the big mound. They're the big mound builders. They were doing pretty good until a guy named DeSoto came through Georgia, South Georgia, right up here near Thomasville, using the rivers. 600 men, bunch of pigs. He used Iberian pigs as a food source and gave them to the Native Americans he met. He'd been down with Pizarro in Peru and helped Pizarro wipe out the Inca. He knew something about killing the Inca. But when he got up here, there were no roads. There was no king. It was a tough country. But he gave pigs to those Indians, and they carried human disease. And it is estimated that about 150 years, 80% of those people died. Gone. Disappeared. All we have left is their property. That's what we've got in mountains and things that they don't. Now, we still have the hogs.
Yeah.
Right? Abbeville claims to be the wild hog capital of America. And we have those thanks to Mr. DeSoto. All right. Oglethorpe found Georgia colony in 1773. Big collision. At that time, Native Americans still own this state. Right? Native Americans still own the state. Oglethorpe did not want slavery, but in 1751, the planters won that game. And so you started to have importation of enslaved, before that, there were enslaved people brought here, but it was justified at that point in time. 1812, right here in South Georgia, Creek Indians were defeated, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend by Andrew Jackson. 1814, they met at Fort Jackson, and he pointed and he said, "You Native Americans who fought against me are going to Oklahoma." He didn't quite say that he didn't own the land, he just said, "You're going to Oklahoma." He gave them some things. I always call them brothers. And then he turned around and he said, "Those of you who fought with me are going with them." Because he wanted to clear them out to create this country for the settlers. So that was a big effect. Then we get to Sherman marching through South Georgia. We didn't have any battles down here, but Sherman walked right through, right? A little bit north here. Well, think about this now. Native Americans own all of Georgia. Here. Native Americans are gone. Replacing them are enslaved people being taken from their homes in Africa and brought here. In 1860, before the Civil War starts, the census tells us there were 1 million people in Georgia. 450,000 were enslaved people. It was big business. You had to replace people. They didn't have long lives. Again, they had to constantly add people. We'll talk about this a little bit later. Following that, of course, then you have Reconstruction, and you have the Jim Crow era, where we have segregation, which is a way actually of creating a down economy. Because you're basically saying to a big segment of the population who never had a chance after the Civil War, that you won't be able to go to good schools, you won't be able to get any good jobs. Segregation was not in any way a useful institution. Very terrible institution. So, those are collisions. That's what the theme is in the book. And I want to come back to the Civil War period just a little bit, since it's something we don't tend to be interested in. This is a business card from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, an institution that's just been put up beautifully that I helped build. It's all about how America became America because of African Americans. This is a business card in Savannah by Blunt and Dawson. And what they're advertising is the sale of property, meaning African Americans, enslaved people. Slaves were considered property. And that's what this card says. We will help you sell your property. And it's being endorsed, interestingly enough, by the sheriff of Chatham County, who just sold the jail to him. They needed a holding place. He said, I'll sell you my business. And he's endorsing. He said, I got a safe place to keep you. That was it. And a lot of human beings were bought and sold by this trade. You know, we heard about businesses, you read the textbook, right? And it tells you the industries in Georgia were cotton, cattle, railroads. No, it was slavery. And if you read the Articles of Secession from Georgia or any other state, it starts out, we are succeeding to protect our property. That was what it was all about. Let me show you what the Smithsonian has in a way of pertinent artifacts related to the Civil War in South Georgia. So, William Tecumseh Sherman is in the National Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian. And he's a very interesting gentleman. The textbook that I read in high school and big grammar school said he was a bad dude. He didn't do anything good for Georgia. Actually, he was a smart guy. He's an interesting guy. They talk about all the damage he did to Georgia. You have to put this into context. He left Atlanta. He got permission from Lincoln and Grant to do it. Put 60,000 men and sent him after John Bell Hood to keep him off the truck. He took 60,000. He left Atlanta November the 15th. He arrived at Savannah December the 15th. 30 days. 60,000 men, 280 miles. They didn't have time to wipe out anybody. They were marching like crazy. He wanted Savannah to help Lincoln get reelected. So he did destroy plantations, he destroyed railroads, he destroyed all the infrastructure. He did that, but he didn't do quite the damage that a lot of people think he did. So the Smithsonian collection, American History said, Dr. Clough, come on over, we got something for you to see. And they pulled out a drawer with a uniform in it and this badge. They said, that uniform William Tecumseh Sherman wore and marched through the sea. It turned out he became a Smithsonian regent one time. This badge was one he designed himself for that march. He took his coat button and made it into a campaign badge. You'll have a hard time seeing it, but this campaign badge says, worn by General W.T. Sherman on the march to the sea. I'm telling you, when you're sitting there looking at that, and I realized when I read it all in the textbook, I'm looking at history. It's pretty stunning. Along the way, the Smithsonian has a weapons collection. And it has one of these in it. It's like Griswold and Gunnison revolver. It was made by Samuel Griswold's armory, which is in Griswold, Georgia. He was a Connecticut boy from the gun business. Came down here to make cotton gin. He couldn't make cotton gins anymore. They said, would you make weapons like your mom and daddy did? And he said, I will. And he made these knockoffs of the Colt 45 Colt weapon. The difference is it's got brass in it instead of steel because Southerners didn't have any steel. 3,500 of these are made. If you get one, prepare to shell out a lot of cash. This is considered one of the most iconic Confederate weapons in the war. That town was destroyed. Griswold today exists in the form of a sign saying it used to be here. But Sherman was certain that would never come back. All right, here's a picture that was drawn. You can see that. It says a bird's eye view of Andersonville Prison, which is in South Georgia, in Nashville. I'll get you back to that in just a minute. This site is in Irwinville. How many have been to Irwinville? Yeah. It's called the capture site of Jefferson Davis, and the monument was built by the Daughters of the Confederacy, as many of the other monuments have been. Gene Talmadge was there in the 30s to dedicate it. And it basically says he was captured at this site. Jefferson Davis, you know, when he left Richmond, he left with a bunch of gold. Everybody thinks he buried gold somewhere. And a fairly large contingent, including an African American who had been a servant in their house, only stayed with him all his life. They kept running and running and running and running, and finally got to Irwinville. Irwinville is another one of the towns that you don't slow down when you go through. But I've been there, and I've been at this site. He thought they would be safe there in Pine Barren, and he and his wife, Marina, and a small group. They woke up in the morning, it was foggy, clanking around a little bit, and guns went off. 2 Union cavalry units on either side of the encampment had gotten there in the night, thinking they could capture Jefferson Davis and maybe get a goal. And they shot at each other. And so the only person who died were a couple of very young Union soldiers. There were very number of heads from them. That was the end of the Civil War. That was the end of everything. And Jefferson Davis was put in the capture for a couple of years. His wife actually had a very vivacious woman. She went on to write for a New York newspaper later on. Very unusual woman. Now my story weaves back into this because at the Cattle Creek Cemetery outside of Waycross, I knew I had a great-great-grandfather buried there. And I went there and I figured out this big cemetery. And I said, I'm going to look at the oldest gravestone I can find. And I'm reading that, and it says it's Colonel John Clough, my great-great-grandfather. That's him. And he was born in Northfield, New Hampshire, 1882. He came to Georgia because the Native Americans had been forced out, and 24 million acres of land became available through the lottery. And he was up in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, anyway. He came down for opportunity. That's the story of her. He would come for opportunity, and he came. And he died in 1859. That's his son, oldest son, Jonathan Gilman Clough. He's my great-grandfather. He was 18 in 1863, and he joined the Georgia 4th Wiregrass Cavalry. They didn't do much, they were down here, not much, until Fighting Joe Hooker called them up to try to stop the unstoppable W.T. Sherman. So while Sherman was marching across Georgia, my great-grandfather was up there messing around, probably trying not to get killed. 6,000 against 60,000 wasn't bad. The good news was, for me, he survived. He got out. That's a story I kind of knew. When I got into this book and I started saying, wait a minute, if my great-great-grandfather came in 1837, and there are hundreds and hundreds plus of New England, they fought for the Union. And that's when I got into that story. And I won't tell you the wholeness of that story, but I will say I went to Andersonville, and 5 of my relatives were captured in different battles. And by the bad luck of the draw, got sent to Andersonville, which was not a prison, it was a holding center. We were only there for about a year and a half. In 1864, designed for 10,000 men, 33,000 were crammed into intolerable conditions, and 13,000 died in about 6 months. And the commandant of the camp tried to trade prisoners, but Grant would not do it, because he was bound on getting the war over. So here it is, J.D. Clough, for 1st Vermont Heavy Cavalry, died. He was 18 years old, thought he was going to liberate the country, and he died in a miserable place. The other relatives died nearby. The 3 of them got out, but 1 died in Marietta Hospital because of his injuries that he sustained there. 2 survived. But to tell you how these stories are interwoven, when you get into it and start looking at your history. So after that, we go into this long, dark period in South Georgia of poverty, bad conditions, poor education, poor health. People have no running water, they have no electricity. That's this generation. So this is Annabelle Gaskin Clough, my grandmother, and Forrest Drew Clough, my grandfather. And he was the son of Jonathan Gilman Clough. They fought hard as small farmers. This is my mother's side, Snipe School, 1907. And this, right over here is my mother. She's in barefooted. And she's sitting next to Grandma Snipes, who smoked pot. And right over here is my grandmother Johnson. Right over here is Charlie Johnson. Small farmers. Both sets of grandparents were decimated by the Depression and lost it. Grandfather Johnson kept some of it. Grandfather Clough lost it. And both of his children, who eventually would become my parents, were told to leave home. This is my mother, when she went to Jacksonville and worked as a secretary right over here. And this is my dad. He went in the Marine. That's the only thing he could do. Yeah, and the only place he could get a job. But they found a way to get back together again. My mother said he bothered her. My dad bothered her, driving around, embarrassed her. But they got married. And here they are at their 50th wedding anniversary. Kelsey, I don't think you know this. Kelsey's not going to need it. That's my sister. That's your grandmother. And my brothers are right over here on the side. That's my mom and dad. So the point of this story is that out of, in spite of the fact of all this poverty, finally, families found a way to make it go away. But South Georgia was a tough place for a long time. Now, one of those people who lived through all those times was President Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter's in this story because he's in the Smithsonian. First of all, to his presidential portrait. But there are about 59 portraits of Jimmy Carter. Some not so complimentary, political cartoons that were kind of Jimmy Carter. But Jimmy Carter's also famous because he wrote books, and this is a book of his childhood. He fished in the Satilla River. His childhood and my childhood were almost identical. They were certainly close to my mother and father's childhood. We have a campaign collection at Smithsonian, and so they have a Carter Peanut Bank. You drop money into the bank, and we had this great picture of him on Time magazine. He also put solar cells in the White House. And there were very good solar cells that heated the water in the White House. When Ronald Reagan came in, he said, get rid of them. It took them a while. They did. They disappeared. 2 years ago, the Smithsonian found out where they were. And the Smithsonian now has one of Jimmy Carter's solar panels. And you may know Jimmy Carter created the Department of Energy and the Alternative Resources Center. So I had to go talk to Jimmy Carter and ask him about his childhood. And I asked him, what do you think broke the back of this cycle of poverty? And rural electrification was a big thing, because it helped everybody's health. And then he said, World War II, and Harry Truman decided after World War II, after African Americans fought and died in that war, they deserved every right that everybody else had. And he integrated the armed forces. Then he said Dr. Martin Luther King. And after that, it took a little while, but after that, everybody in America, everybody in Georgia felt they had a chance to be as good as anybody else. That doesn't mean everything's equal for any of us, but they have a chance. And it was an interesting answer, and I think he was right. Civil rights made a big difference. Everybody has a chance. All right, we're going to finish up here with the other side of the story, and that's the natural history side. Because in all these collisions, animals were involved. And a lot of times they got the short end of the stick. And this is one of the creatures that did get the short end of the stick, the ivory-billed woodpecker. When Mark Catesby was here and wrote his book in 1741, which he entitled, and he had a letter to his sponsor, the royalty in England, and he said, I bring to you things new and strange you've never seen before. So in 1741, people in Europe had never seen what we take for granted. That's new and strange. That's what it's like. The ivory-billed woodpecker is sometimes known as the Lord God bird, because when it flew, it was so big. How many of you have seen a pileated woodpecker? This is much bigger. And it was, opened up the market, love South Georgia. It was so big, people would say, Lord God, what a bird. Today we can't see that because it's extinct. And other birds are extinct. So during the course of civilization moving into this state, let's say white civilization moving into this state, we were careless about taking care of the environment, and we lost great animals. We almost lost the long-legged pine. And these guys go together. You know, when you don't have long-legged pine, you don't have ivory-billed woodpeckers. Everything in nature is connected. You have to be careful about nature. Another lesson in the book. There's some good news. There are places where we decided to save something, and we did. When I was a boy, my dad in Okeechobee Swamp fishing, we'd see alligators. I didn't know they were on their way to extinction. But the Endangered Species Act saved them. And today they're back to a sustainable population. Almost lost them. How would you like to go to Okeechobee Swamp and not see an alligator? Big turkey. Wild turkeys. Jimmy Carter and I agreed you almost never saw wild turkeys when we were growing up, because they were on their way to extinction. And hunters and environmentalists and property owners decided to save them. Work together, good things happen. And we do have wild turkeys. Now, this is got collections here. So there are obviously alligators in the collections, so that's going to be in there. This guy's in there, thanks to Herbert Stoddard, one of the great conservationists of all time. When I started looking into collections for wild turkeys, I saw the name Stoddard. And some from his own land. Stoddard made sure the Smithsonian had Georgia's wild turkeys in the collection, so we're thankful to him for doing that. There's always a story. Now, this is the last slide, just to say, I think South Georgia is a beautiful place, and some of the places I love is Broxton Rocks outside of Douglas, which is the southernmost waterfall area, with the sandstone there, with me and my friends there in Frankie's now. And Frankie's identified all kinds of rare species that are there. Okay, like the greenfly orchid, which is an epiphyte. And it uses water out of the air to survive. When I went to the Smithsonian, I said the Smithsonian had 8,000 orchids in its collection. And those orchids are endangered because of loss of habitat. American orchids are seen nowhere else in the world. I said, do you have a greenfly orchid? And they said no. I said, I'll get you one. And Frankie got, with the permission of the Nature Conservancy and Georgia Wildlife, we gave the Smithsonian a greenfly orchid. The Satilla River and the Sugar Sands is one of those beautiful black rivers. It's semi-protected, but the Satilla River keepers do their best to try to keep this clean. Great fishing, beautiful river flows down into the Atlantic Ocean. Beautiful, beautiful. And this is the LeConte Plantation. And Caroline Harrington, who passed away after this book was written, was one of the docents trying to restore part of that plantation, both for the African Americans who were enslaved there, who lived there. And there was a group of African Americans who lived nearby called LeConte. And they took the name and dropped the, and they have restored some of the slave dwellings there. So this is a story of the time, and the LeConte patriots, the older LeConte, loved camellias, and this is the Norman red, LeConte Norman red. So the really gist of this, the important thing about this is, after you go through all of this is, what are we going to save for the future? We've lost things. We've lost a lot. We don't have to create a Yellowstone Park. We don't have to do that. But we can say, here's an area we want to try to preserve so our grandkids can see something that's rare and unusual, things new and strange that are here in South Georgia and nowhere else. We can do that. We can make that decision now. And we can also make the decision to write our history books and face up to the things we did wrong. Because it's a richer history when you say, we now try to do things right. So history gets better. And Jack is back here with the museum from, I was over there this morning, the Black History Museum, which is fantastic and important resource here in Thomasville, helping you save your history, the entire history of Thomasville. So those are the things that I think are important to come out of the book. Now it's time to think about, build on the past and think about the future. Well, thank you very much for coming.
We do have time, obviously, for a few Q&A, and I'll open it up to the floor if I don't see any hands up. Of course, I'm tempted. I have millions of questions, but I'll let you guys chime in first if anybody has any questions for Dr. Clough. Or you feel like you've learned it all? I mean, there's only a couple million items in this. I know the NMAI, when I used to work with them, they had like 8 million, and you said overall all the Smithsonians have hundreds of millions or something. So you mentioned the moment you had with Sherman's, they weren't epaulets, but pins. Do you have any other moments like that you ran into things that you know, maybe weren't specifically tied to your family background, but just that in general U.S. history or something kind of
Yeah,
gave you pause?
I think, you know, the Roman Harper collection that the longleaf pine, just, it was so, I sat there and looked and I said, who did this? And, you know, that it was collected, and I never expected to find anything from Douglas, Georgia. And out of 1.2 million things,
Yeah.
there's one. Turned out there were a few more, but I think. You know, and you grow up, you know, in awe of certain animals. Alligators, an example, to find them represented as, you know, snakes. There were plenty of snakes. The largest diamondback rattlesnake in the, what they call the wet place, that means in the bottom, is a diamondback rattler from South Georgia.
Sure, that's the reputation we were.
And I think the birds were very poignant because they were tied to that LeConte history. They had passenger pigeons, and they had Carolina parakeets, and they had, and the Ivory woodpecker incidentally was collected in 1861 in the Okanokie Swamp. That specimen.
Yeah.
That was collected there. So over and over again, you just saw these things that were very powerful around you. You should also remember, I mean, a big part of the book is William Bartram, of course, wrote his Bartram Journals. He spent 4 years, a lot of it in South Georgia. And he didn't write it until about 40 years later, but he finished it and became a bestseller. And he wrote so beautifully about the longleaf pine forests that were massive. When John Muir walked through here on his first great journey, he walked right through Georgia to the Gulf, 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf. He walked through and talked about the beauty of the longleaf pine. I tell people, when I went to California, and how many of you have been to Muir Woods? Okay. I don't know if it's like you, but you go to Muir Woods and you stop talking. You realize these trees have been there for 1,000 years. They've heard it all. They don't need to hear it again. And it's so magnificent with the stillness about it. And the longleaf pine barren is very close to that. It has that beauty to it, that elegance to it. Because longleaf pines wipe out all the competitive species and only have the very clear, beautiful beauty.
Randy, you have a question?
Tell the audience about George's ice cave.
Say it again.
George's ice, I-C-E, cave.
Ice caves?
No.
It's interesting. I don't know about the ice caves. I'm learning something.
It's a cave in Georgia that in the summer it creates ice.
Oh, okay.
And in the winter, the ice melts.
It's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know about that. But, you know, if it's deep enough, obviously the temperature can get cold enough, but that's really unusual to create ice. Must have some water coming from somewhere else, and then it gets in a situation where it's a cold ground. Interesting.
Where is it, huh? I can't remember. Somewhere in the center of the state. It's in a cave, and it can be visited. It's on the map.
That's interesting. I'll have to look that up. I learn something new every day. Another question?
Is there a connection between LeConte plantation and the pear, LeConte pear?
The contemplation of what?
LeConte plantation and the pear, is there a connection?
Yes.
The which?
The pear. There's a pear trees.
Oh, the pear trees. Oh, yeah. Well, the two brothers, the ones that I was talking about, Joseph and John, their father, Louis LeConte, the LeContes were Huguenots. And so you may know that for some reason or other, the French kind of went crazy at one point in time. Huguenots were Protestants, but they tended to be people who occupied the scientific class, the lawyerly class, and so forth. And people were envious of them. And so for some reason or other, they decided to kill them. And the Huguenots were slaughtered. And the Huguenots came to Canada and the United States primarily. And we were lucky to get them because they were the creme de la creme of French people. And the LeConte family settled in New York and New Jersey, but they had a friend who had bought a rice plantation, and they went down there in the winter. It was a wintering plant. And so when Louis and his brother, when his father died, they were all scientifically inclined. Louis got the plantation, and the other brother got the properties in New York. And so when he came down here, he loved botanical work. So if there's a LeConte pear, it probably is related to Louis. That was him. Joseph's cousin was one of the most famous folks who were entomologists. He identified all kinds of beetles. John tended to be a physicist. Joseph was a geologist, and he was a very famous geologist. They owned slaves. There are people who want to take their names off of properties. There are mountains in North Carolina named after Lockhart, and in California. There's a building at the University of Georgia where they taught named after the building in South Carolina named after them.
Well, at the turn of the last century, there were LeConte pear trees all over Thomasville.
Then there's a LeConte sparrow, and that is named after one of the LeContes. So the LeConte name, you'll find it in a lot of places. They were wide range, people with really incredible wide range names. But Luis was the one who was focused on plants. Probably that was it.
I had a question. On the projectile points that you showed, you could see McGlashan and Thomas. I'm assuming Thomas came.
So what happened was, remember the story of the Clough point is, the Clough point was first identified in 1930 or so. That's when the highway cut out in New Mexico, and they cut into a bank and they saw this mammoth, a skeleton right there. And they looked inside and they saw projectile points inside of it, so they knew that was what killed it. So 1930 was when they figured out that these things were used to kill the big animals, right? Well, Mr. McGlashan was a highway conductor on the Central Georgia Railroad, and he was here, Cambridge Scottish, came over, and he worked on the railroad before the Civil War, and then when Sherman destroyed the railroad, he helped rebuild it. But he was interested in collecting, and he collected all kinds of artifacts, Native American artifacts.
I think it caught her attention because during the Civil War and Reconstruction, one of the best-known figures, former mayor of Thomasville, was Peter Alexander Selkirk McGlashan,
Oh, really?
who had a wide variety of jobs here, and I believe he ended up drowning in Savannah. There was a slightly odd story about how he had passed away, but the McGlashan name is very well known in Thomasville history.
McGlashan then worked on the railroad, and he collected, wherever he went, he found Native American artifacts. He didn't know what he was collecting. He just collected. And unfortunately, he didn't provenance anything. In other words, he did not document where it came from or what layer of soil it came from. So it didn't have any value.
Sure.
But he collected so many points. So when the work began trying to understand how people got to Georgia and South Carolina and how Clovis points got here, doesn't fit with the established theory. They started going through McGlashan's collections. They said, look at all these things. And they dated them, and they go back 13,000 years. So they realized, unfortunately, they threw a lot of McGlashan things away because they were not prominent. But they realized they had a trove of these Clovis from McGlashan. And they found them from other collections. There was another collector who gave Smithsonian 90,000 things from down in south of Augusta. And again, you found Clovis points there. And now my friend Frankie Snow's finding them. So there's a whole ream of a whole story behind archaeology we don't understand.
Yeah. A lot of people in the country always, my relatives have, oh, there's no prehistory in the Southeast. And I'm like, how about that? And down at Page Ladson site and things in right there in the Bend in Florida, hugely important stuff. So, which is not that far from here.
And since they found the first Arematherium, it was misclassified as a megalitherium. I'll tell you the story real quickly. So the megalitherium was first found in Argentina in 1700, late 1700s. And the men who found it sent it to Madrid, the Naturalist Museum. And they reconstructed it. Everybody said, wow, I've never seen anything like this. Well, they didn't because it never existed over there. And later on, another one showed up, not as big as that one, in North America. And it was given to Thomas Jefferson, who collected fossils. And he wrote a paper about it, called the ground sloth of the clod count or something like that. It ended up being named after. But Jefferson didn't believe things could go extinct. There was a French scholar at the time who said things can go extinct and we can find them. You may find their relatives later on of different animals, but you can find this one. So when Jefferson set Lewis and Clark out, he was all very careful himself. He said, look out for that big clawed animal. Really slow moving. Bring him back. And of course, they didn't bring him back. And so the other side of that coin is a pretty amazing story. These guys, of course, came across the Isthmus of Panama and made the northern route when the Isthmus of Panama was created 3 million years ago. And so I kind of like them. I mean, they chose us. Now, we wiped them out. Now, how do they take revenge on them? They have a lovely cousin called the armadillo. He's digging up your garden now. Remember, the armadillo wasn't here. He's migrating across. Another story. Nothing sits still. Let's see.
It's made it to northeast Georgia now too. I live in White County and the armadillo has made it up there.
I think there might be one more question. Did you have a question? No? Anybody else? Oh, no, go ahead.
Have you met Janice Ray from Georgia? She's an author from Georgia.
Janice Ray? Yeah, she's a good
Ray.
friend. Yeah, she's a great friend. And she intimidated me so much when I read her writing. I said, I can't write the book I thought I was going to write. I'm going to write this book because she can't write it because she didn't have the collection. Yeah, we were both at the Decatur Book Fair this year, and she's a beautiful writer. And she's good friends with Frankie Snow. It's a small community of people. She's a terrific writer. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, Joe, you have one question?
Was there a culture on the Osceola River that they haven't been able to identify where this culture came from, these people? I seem to have heard sometime there was some people there we can't really identify where they came from. Is that?
Well, the peculiar thing is, I'm not an archaeologist. I learned a lot writing this book, and I'm just enough to be dangerous. There are people who believe that the southeast could have somehow been populated by people who got here 50,000 years ago. There is a group in South Carolina that's excavated a site that claims that. There are people who believe that people came here perhaps on foot, but keep in mind, 25,000 years ago was an ice age. And Georgia was not covered up with ice, which is great. But all in Kentucky and everything was glaciers there, and the whole Atlantic Ocean, North Atlantic Ocean was icebound. Now, some people will argue people could have made their way across that ice front by fishing for mammals, seals, and so forth, and come in. But nobody's really proven that. I will say, and I think someone mentioned the fact that because most of our archaeology is buried under these sediments, you have to keep in mind that 20,000 years ago, sea level was 400 feet below where it is today. So the coast of Georgia was 200 miles out. Now, if you go back 15,000 years ago, it's still out 100 miles. That's where people live. They live next to the ocean for food. So again, our archaeology there is not covered up by sediment, it's covered up by water. And so there's as was mentioned, the history, we know very little about that history. It's all out there to be discovered. So there's a lot more about Georgia that we don't know yet. It's good.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. So the books, Dr. Clough's books are for sale in the back. Somebody could already purchase them. And
I want to thank Scott for the refreshments.
yes, thank you, Scott.
Nice.